East African Breweries said last month that sales of its 20% stake in SAB Miller's Tanzanian unit, which is expected to raise some $71 million, has been delayed indefinitely. East African Breweries will inform the market as soon as the revised timetable for the offer has been agreed and approved. Maciek, let's start with you first. We've got, I mean, again, we're looking at Kenya. This is not a place we've ever thought. We've always figured East Africa, fairly thriving, fairly happening, established places in there. One thing I want to touch on, a couple of issues. The first one I want to go through is new rules coming in, new laws, new Alcoholic Drinks Control Act, which has placed a damper on them. I suppose that's always one of your potential issues. And it's not cigarettes by any stretch, but in the alcohol beverage market, there is that risk of government legislation.
Sure. Can I actually just point out one correction? The offer is actually going ahead right now.
Is it now going ahead?
It is going ahead. I think there were delays, technical delays in terms of approvals, but the offer was actually launched last week and it's going to be concluded next week, Friday. So just as clarity from going forward. Yes, the regulatory regime in Kenya, it's not isolated because you see there's a global trend towards towards putting more emphasis or understanding the impact that alcohol drinking and alcohol abuse specifically can have on society. So besides the high costs of hospitalization and drug abuse and so on, I think there is a huge social aspect to this. So Kenya is merely following what the rest of the world has done. So for example, it has enforced labeling on bottles, which was quite interesting because there was a mistake in one of the rules in Kenya, which said that the warning label has to be 30% of the bottle, not 30% of the label. So actually the warning label was supposed to be bigger than the entire label, but that's beside the point. But secondly, it's the selling times when alcohol can be purchased. In South Africa, in some provinces, I think still you can't buy alcohol on Sundays.
I think in most of them, in fact,
in most provinces. So that is definitely being introduced in Kenya, and also not selling alcohol throughout the whole day. So I think at 7, 8 o'clock the shops have to close, and serving alcohol in pubs and restaurants is also limited. But this is something we're used to.
The market's going to work their way through it. This is
exactly. This is just an adjustment. I think everyone knew it was coming. It was a question how it's going to be enforced, how it's going to be regulated, and I think it's just a question of time. So opening hours, labels, warnings, and I think also a part of the story is the excise duties. How friendly is the excise regime for a company which is selling alcohol? You actually find that excise duties in East Africa are generally in line or above global averages, and I think that's a risk that the sin taxes are actually taken too far, and what you're going to have is a perverse effect where you drive people away from the expensive commercial beer to the illicit, unsafe,
and the more dangerous. And we've seen that before.
Alcohol.
Chris, to come to you quickly, we've got potential legislation in South Africa around banning of alcohol advertising. My sense is the big dominant players would love it because it entrenches them, because the new upstarts can't compete.
Totally. And I mean, you're not going to get SAB to ever admit this, but you know, with an 89% market share, if you ban advertising, it means that Brand House, which has currently got about 9% or thereabouts, it will never get any further than that. And you only have to look as far as the tobacco side. I mean, BAT, 15 years ago, had an 86% market share. Today, it's got an 86% market share. It'll just entrench it in perpetuity. So yes, that's one of the unintended consequences of banning advertising.
SAB would quite like, they're never going to admit it, I think they would quite like it. They would save a truckload in advertising as well. Let's move on to Diageo. It's the world's largest producer of spirits, a major producer of beer and wine on the continent. They own Brand House in South Africa, as Chris just mentioned. They've got the rights to Windhoek and Heineken. Is this one of the dominant players up there with SAB? And they seem to be across the markets, and they're not just in the beer space. They've got a large presence in the spirits market at the same time.
Yeah, actually Diageo it was a combination of Guinness and someone else. They merged a few years back. The beer portfolio of Diageo is actually quite small, which is mainly the Guinness brand.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, Great Britain and Africa constitutes bulk of the beer portfolio. So Diageo sees itself as a lifestyle alcoholic beverages company. So Smirnoff vodka, the coolers, Smirnoff Ice, exactly. So the beer is quite small, but in terms of in the African context, it's actually very potent force. As you might know, Nigeria surpassed Ireland as the second largest Guinness drinking nation in the world. And that's where Diageo is actually investing in the brewing assets in Nigeria while it's closing breweries in Ireland. So I think this is indicative of the story that the Guinness brand has a very strong following, and specifically in East Africa, in West Africa, you find that it's actually a very cultural brand, which is part of the history of the people. It's not just an alcoholic drink.
Chris, let's go right back to where we started in a sense. IMF is saying that 7 of the top 10 countries that are going to be growing over the next 5 years are going to be in Africa. And that's exactly what these emerging markets in this continent is. And it's why we're getting the fierce competition happening here and the capital expenditure and the like.
Oh, absolutely. And if you talk to Graham Mackay at SAB Miller about where's his preferred destination in terms of best return, it's Africa. Having said that, beer is a relatively elitist drink on the continent. And coming back to what Maciek was saying, it's the price is actually very high, and that's one of the reasons why SAB has spent the past 7 years developing a low-cost product in the form of cassava beer, because barley as an input product is not indigenous to Africa. You have to adapt it to grow properly in Africa. Right. And so it all adds to the cost, and the excise duties are pretty high. So you find that most people actually can't afford it, and the worry is that they will be tempted to go for these lethal, toxic, and quite deadly
unregulated, untaxed products.
That's right. So it's.
Okay, so it's certainly Africa's the happening place. That we absolutely know. Certainly it seems that beer is happening in Africa. And notwithstanding what Chris says, there's a lot of work to be done, I think, by the majors across the board. We're going to have to leave it there, gents, because time is against us. But we can quickly go to our hot stocks. Maciek, let's start with you. Of the 4 beer stocks we've looked at today, what would be the one that would come to the top for you?
Look, from my perspective, I can make. I've got good knowledge of the 2, East African Breweries and Delta. Definitely Delta would be my preferred pick, simply from the point of view that it's the growth potential we mentioned earlier. It's actually a recovery story. It still has quite far to go. The regulatory regime and the excise regime is definitely much better, or sort of less risky than East African Breweries. And I think it's a solid company which trades on a forward PE of about 12-13 times.
I saw that, not about dividend yield, and as you said, Zimbabwe is coming right in spite of the government. Imagine what happens when the government gets it right. Then Zimbabwe is going to rock, and Delta will be there. Chris, for you, you've decided to park the beer. You're going to go and buy yourself a lounge suite, JD Group.
Yes, I'm very envious of Maciek. We don't cover these other Africans, only SAB. But having said that, yes, JD for me, I spent some time with management this morning, and I'm still absolutely convinced that the share price really is not reflecting what's going on in that company. The results came out on last Monday, and they were actually superb. I think the market is waiting to see if this good improvement can be sustained. I think that's really, it's the credibility that's perhaps lacking in the eyes of investors. Not as far as I'm concerned. I think it looks very, very hot indeed, and I think there's a lot of upside potential in this one.
And the deal with Steinhoff, I know a couple of folks have said, and I've been one of them, who said, when Steinhoff does a deal, there's so much paperwork and confusion. A couple of folks, I think, are still probably wading through that. But the more I start to step back and look at it, it certainly looks like a good deal for them. I mean, they got Steinbuild, they got the Unitrans, which is the motor vehicles, and a couple of lower priced vehicles coming in. Looks quite good.
Yes, and as far as the vehicle side, the rental side is concerned, they haven't even started that yet. Yep. It's a pilot project. So that's all to come. What I'm talking about is what's actually there, what's banked. And they've still got a bit more on the way of margin improvement to come through, including what part of the Steinhoff deal as well. So yeah, I think that's all cream on top, as is Steinbuild.